Welcome to The Gas, the official podcast of American Cars and Racing and AmericanCarsAndRacing.com. I'm Gary Gastelou. This is the Gary and Alex show. That means there must be an Alex around here somewhere. Oh,
Here
there
I
he
am,
is.
Gary.
There he
I'm
is,
right here.
rummaging through the A car, the American Cars and Racing garage refrigerator. You should check the expiration date on that stuff because, as with all garage food and drink, it's probably way overdue and very old.
If it's refrigerated, I consider it fresh, Gary. We'll take our chances.
Speaking of old stuff, though, later on we're going to be talking to Revology CEO Tom Scarpello about how you can buy a brand new 56-year-old Ford Mustang. Not like new, but actually brand new. You will need a pretty big check, though. We'll get to that later in the show. But the big automotive news this week was President Trump's announcement that he is officially rolling back the Biden administration's fuel economy standard targets from 50.4 miles per gallon in 2031 to 34.5 miles per gallon in 2031. Those numbers are unadjusted. They're not what you see on the sticker. Those are the CAFE, the corporate average fuel economy figures that they use, figure more like 38 miles per gallon and 26, 27. Alex, who is the big winner with these new regulations?
Uh, Actually, I don't even know how to call winners and losers here. The reality is this. If you watched the thing as we did live, the big talking point was this will reduce, the cost of new cars by $1,000, which if the average transaction price of a new car is over $50,000, we're still talking about expensive cars. What it theoretically does is it gives everybody breathing room to create things that are perhaps not as complex as the highly electrified vehicles that the previous standards were effectively forcing into existence, right? So the winner ultimately, you ideally, is the consumer. But I mean, let's be clear here. The biggest news out of that press conference wasn't even the relaxation of the cafe standards. It was the non sequitur by the president when he effectively took everybody in the room by surprise, especially Sean Duffy, who, if you were watching this thing, and if you didn't watch it, go back and watch it. When Trump basically came out and says, "Yeah, in Japan they have these really cute and adorable and beautiful small cars, and I think that we should be able to have these here." And I've instructed, the DOT to alter the regulations to have this. And Duffy was a bit caught flat-footed there. And of course, it took a little while for it to circulate on X and everything. But all everybody's talking about now is, oh, you can get K cars in America, or you're going to be able to get K cars in America. And it's not that simple. He's very much about domestic production. But if this results in a relaxation of standards that allows for the profitable creation of inexpensive, smaller cars, trucks, SUVs, not necessarily K spec, because that's a very uniquely Japanese thing. That's good news for everybody because there are not that many affordable new cars on the lower end of the price spectrum.
And just for those of you who don't know, K cars are micro compact cars, mostly sold in Japan, other Asian countries as well. They have 600cc engines, a maximum of 63 horsepower. They're very cheap. Some of them start under 10 grand, but they go up to 15 grand or so. They make cars, SUVs, trucks. They're all smaller than a Fiat 500. And the reason they don't sell them here, besides the fact that Americans don't really like tiny cars, is that none of them are engineered to US safety standards. In fact, the only one that's ever been sold here was the electric Mitsubishi i-MiEV. They sold 2,000 of those over, I think, a 6-year period. Of course, it was electric. It only had 62 miles of range. Not exactly the same thing as these gas-powered K cars. It sounded like to sell these cars here, they're going to want you to build them here as well. By the time you do that, by the time you throw in some safety standards, unless they just throw that out, you're looking at 15, $20,000 cars anyway. So I'm
Right.
just not sure this is the solution to affordability, although there would be kind of cool to have around.
The issue with announcements like this, and I can see where the OEMs get sort of really it can be very frustrating because you're caught in the crossfire of these announcements, which are, 50% political, let's be honest. The cars that are coming out this year, next year, the year after have been in development the last 4 or 5 years. Yeah, maybe with digital design and everything else, you see certain manufacturers are quicker with their refreshes and things like that, and that's because they're able to do a lot of this digital twinning and stuff in a digital domain, in terms of from the design perspective. The reality is none of this can happen overnight, and there are still regulatory hurdles that are unique to our market that are going to have to be dealt with if we're going to get a sort of run on new small compact cars, which frankly I think it would be great. I bought a Hyundai Venue for the young drivers of my family to drive, and I enjoy driving it too because it's this really practical small thing. There's a lot to like about offering more affordable vehicles, which are going to be by their very nature smaller for the most part. So I don't know how it ends. It's not going to be overnight. It'll be interesting to see what the automakers now all have to say. And it'll be very interesting to see what the actual policies are as written, coming from the DOT.
One thing about the dynamic going on here with the new fuel economy ratings is that, first of all, essentially what they did is they took EVs out of the equation. You
Right.
needed EVs to get to 50.4. You got credit for building zero emissions EVs. That's not part of this anymore. The new CAFE regulations, and I know a lot of people have been missing this, are purely for cars that don't have plugs. Internal combustion engine cars, hybrids, non-plug-in hybrids. So really, they're not making cars less efficient. They're just not pushing EVs on top of that. So it's not like we're like, oh, you can make gas guzzlers now. You can't. You still have rules for that as far as the internal combustion engine vehicles are concerned. Now, that said, we know that a lot of automakers, they have these very high power trucks they love selling, very
Yeah.
expensive, a lot of money. Ford recently pointed out that we could sell more Raptors if we didn't have to hit these targets. So I think they're going to be looking more at that than they are at micro compact K car as
Right.
far as increasing their sales.
I think there is still an incentive to make things as efficient as possible because you want to have more affordable vehicles. That's one part of it. Automakers need to sell things that make money, otherwise they go out of business, right? But the other part of it is fuel costs. So, one of their big things is they want to push down the price of gas. Yeah. So the cheaper gas is, the more affordable it is to own any car, including, the big trucks that, everybody loves to sell and everybody, frankly, in the country loves to drive.
But back in the old days, when we weren't as worried about fuel efficiency and emissions, it was all about cars, specifically the golden era of the muscle cars. Now, I'm not saying we should go back to those days as far as the environmental side of thing, but boy, I mean, you had so many to choose from back then, didn't you?
Oh yeah, it was awesome. And everybody was in the game and it was just one-upmanship left and right. And it was a fun time. And it's always fun to revisit.
Of course, there were a few standouts. One of my favorites, the 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429. They only made about 1,300 of these in 69 and 70. It's basically a NASCAR homologation car, but became one of the greatest muscle cars of the era. They're hard to find today, expensive if you do on the auction block. But if you really want one, you can get a brand new one today, more or less. With us to talk about that is the founder and CEO of Florida's Revology Cars, Tom Scarpello. Thanks for joining the show, Tom.
Thanks for having me, Gary and Alex.
So, when your company first launched about a decade ago, you were building the 1964 and a half Mustang, the 65, those first Mustangs. These
Mhm.
are total reproductions of those original cars, more or less.
Yeah.
You've moved on from there up to the later 60s for your models now. But before we get to that, let's get back to the beginning of the company. How
Mhm.
many of these cars have you sold over the past decade or so?
Well, we delivered sold close to 400. We delivered right around 330 cars to date to clients in 20 countries, including the US. So definitely global reach these days. And we have a lot of repeat customers. Around 40 or so people have come back to buy a second, third, or more. We have one client who either has taken delivery of or ordered a total of 14 cars from us. So
14 for
very
themselves.
14. Yeah. So very, very loyal, dedicated. customers.
That's pretty amazing. Back then, you were using bodies supplied by a bodybuilding company and then manufacturing the cars yourself. Now, they're basically all new, but they are technically restorations. There's a core of a donor car somewhere in there. What's the
Yeah.
amount of original car that's still in these vehicles?
Well, not much really. And that's an interesting philosophical discussion about at what point does the car cease to be the original car? And I could elaborate on that. If you're familiar with the ship of Theseus concept, that's basically what we're doing. I mean, the cars have all new bodies. It's all new steel. We build them in-house on our own fixturing. That allows us to control dimensions perfectly. It allows us to control the weld integrity. And importantly, we're assembling them with heat-cured structural adhesive, the way modern cars are built. And that results in an extremely stiff, rigid, durable unibody. And as you know, in a unibody car, there's no frame. The subframes, which are part of the unibody, are what the chassis attaches to. So it's critical that that structure be sound. And you don't get that with a 60-year-old body, but you do get that with a brand new body with the enhancements that we've implemented.
And these bodies, when I look at them, they look exactly the same as the originals. Are they carbon copies or do you change the size at all?
Now they're dimensionally identical, and that's important for authenticity. So one of the big, questions that we have is because, what the appeal of these cars is the emotions that they evoke, right? And a big part of that's the styling. And so we want to try to retain that as much as we can, but we are also trying to make them function like modern automobiles. So there's an inherent trade-off there between the vintage appearance and the modern functionality. And a great example is the wheels. Most of the cars that we build today either came originally on 14 or 15-inch diameter wheels. Well, you can't get a modern brake package in that size wheel. So our wheels are 17-inch, and we use like every last bit of that space to package modern brakes. So there's a little bit of a trade-off in terms of the appearance, the larger wheel, but the benefit that you get in terms of the improved functionality, the safety, the confidence of the modern four-wheel disc brakes with 6-piston calipers in front, 4-piston in the rear, it's worth it. And those are the kinds of trade-offs that we make, but we generally try to keep the integrity of the original style.
And who is it that wants to buy a modernized reproduction of one of these cars instead of buying an original and fixing it up?
Yeah, it's all over the place. I would say when we started, we sort of segmented customers into these psychographic groups. So demographically, you wouldn't be surprised to know that generally our customer base skews male, 60s, 70s. So people who grew up with the 60s muscle cars and they have some emotional connection, they have some meaning to those people. But psychographically, it was kind of interesting. They sort of went into these four categories, and one was the collectors. And so where you might think that collectors aren't really that enthusiastic about what we do because they value originality, it's really not true. They value originality for cars that they collect, but cars that they drive, it's a totally different story. And that's why we're appealing to them, because this is a classic car that they can drive. They can take it on trips and be confident that the car is going to, always perform as expected. Where, with their classic cars, it's not necessarily the case. We did have some customers that we called been there, done that. That was the term that we used. They'd sort of bought everything and owned everything, and they were familiar with everything. And this was kind of the next new thing that they hadn't tried out yet. We have a group that we call gift to self, which is someone that's, worked hard their whole life and gotten to the point where they're ready to reward themselves. And this is something that has meaning to them. And it is kind of a reflection of who they are and how far they've come, which frankly was the driver for our tagline, "We're part of your journey." But because we really we really discovered that we resonate a lot with people that, have worked hard, entrepreneurs, a lot of them, and kind of built something, created something, and now we're at a point in their life where they wanted to reward themselves. The last one was kind of a lifestyle person, and this was someone that never would have considered a classic car. Just wasn't on the radar. It wasn't something that they would have done because they're maybe not mechanically inclined, and they're concerned about reliability and those kinds of things. But because we offer a classic car experience without the downfalls, then all of a sudden we become a viable option for them. So those are kind of the main groups of people who make up our customer base.
Should know Tom used to work for the Ford Motor Company, so you're sort of keeping that legacy going on here by building the Mustangs today. You started, like I said, with the earlier ones. You've moved up the years now. Is that because you supplied the demand for those early ones and now you want to find different markets, or is it a different reason you guys just want to do new stuff?
Yeah, not necessarily. We're still kind of trying to find the real sweet spot between having a diverse portfolio of products and having an efficient manufacturing system, because it's a lot of complexity that we manage because we're essentially building an entire vehicle. And, OEMs will build, a product in a factory, and, they're doing 1,000 of them a day or over a couple of shifts. And even at that volume, and they're very, very focused. But the number of variants that we manage here, I mean, if you add up all the buildable combinations, it's like in the millions of theoretical combinations. It's a lot of complexity. It's a lot of parts. It's a lot of
You're talking about all
processes.
those customizations that you allow each buyer to
Well,
choose
and
from.
and I hate to say customization because like everything's really on a menu, but if you just choose from the menu, it gives you, literally millions of options when you consider all the colors and trim and all of the materials that you could select from. So there's a lot of complexity. So we're trying to kind of balance that. But when we launched, we're preparing to launch the '69 Boss 429. We thought, well, we're gonna have to let something go, right? Because we just can't keep adding, to the system. At some point it becomes unmanageable. So we decided, we had started with the 65, 66, and we built a lot of those. We had a lot of satisfied customers. Many of those came back and purchased a 67 or 68. Many of those people have come back and placed an order for the Boss, which is great. Would we bring back a 65 or 66 in the future? Perhaps. It really depends on, whether the demand warrants it. But again, if we did, something would have to go. So I think what you'll probably see in the future is sort of a phase in and phase out of different models, based on, kind of our product development cycles and, what the demand is in the marketplace.
Looks old on the outside, but as you said, very modern underneath. You've got a double wishbone suspension in this thing. You swap in a Ford 8.8-inch rear axle, I believe. And you've got the 710 horsepower supercharged version of the Coyote 5-liter V8. What's the driving experience like for this? Do I feel like I'm driving an old car or feel like I'm driving a new car?
Yeah, it's really unique because it's both. You're in the car with the windshield is kind of upright like the vintage cars were, and the IP is authentic, and you feel like you're in a 60s car. But then when you tip into the throttle and you just accelerate, and when you go over bumps and you don't hear squeaks and rattles and things, your brain is just kind of telling you, wait, this doesn't add up. This isn't what I expected. So it's a really interesting mix of old and new. I can't say that there's anything like it. It's really a unique experience.
Now, I was checking auction prices on original Boss 429s, and they run in the $400,000 range for a nicely preserved one. That's about where yours starts for a new one. You're not the only company that builds cars like this. I mean, exactly like this, obviously, but you're not the only company that does resto mods and these very high-end rebuilds of these classic cars. There's a lot of people willing to spend this kind of money on them. And do you see that market changing at all? or has that been pretty consistent for you over these years?
Well, I think it's growing. I think there's a lot of indications that it's growing. As far as the collector market, I think that's a really different segment, because those cars, it's more like a piece of art that you hang on your wall, or in this case, you put it in your garage, and if you drive it, you're actually depreciating it. The value of that vehicle is almost entirely intangible value. Whereas the value of our vehicle is almost entirely tangible value. It's actual content that you can see and feel and touch and use. And I what I've seen from our customers, considering some of the people who are really avid collectors, what I've seen is that they, as they start to experience our cars, and our cars become a bigger part of their portfolio, they start selling off their classic cars. And the answer is, well, I don't really use it. It just sits in my garage. It's still worth something. I'm going to get something out of it, but they kind of lose interest. And I dare say that would be a trend that could continue as, people become more aware of us and what we do and what we offer. I think more people will question, what's really the value of that collector car. So that's regarding them. And you said a lot of companies in this segment. Yeah, and everyone always likes to say, well, nobody's like us, right? We're different from but honestly, we are quite different from anyone else in this segment. And I think there's a few reasons for it. One is, we have an OEM approach. Our background, my background is almost entirely OEM. I spent a little time in OEM retail, but vast majority of my career was either with Ford Motor Company or with Nissan Motor. And our leadership team is several members of our leadership team also have OEM experience. So we didn't come out of the custom car world, and we don't do things the way custom car people do. I think most of the resto mods on the market are really commodities. They're kind of all using the same set of parts from the same set of aftermarket companies. Not that they're bad companies or they're bad parts, but what they're making is pretty much, it's not a differentiated product. I mean, they perform the same. They basically do things the same way. You put the same parts on two different cars, and generally are going to perform pretty similarly. What differentiates them is how they look, how they're put together. But, our car really, from a functional standpoint, is quite different than anything else on the market. That's really why our owner loyalty is so high. So many repeat customers. When people do discover us, then they wonder why they were even looking at anybody else.
When you first started was right around the same time that the Low Volume Motor Vehicle Manufacturers Act got passed, which was intended to allow companies like you to build cars like this from the ground up, not have to restore an existing vehicle. The law changed a little bit here and there. Ultimately, when it was finally passed, it was going to allow for 325 cars a year for companies that made fewer than 5,000 cars a year, as long as they were based on a historic design. That's been passed, hasn't really been entirely implemented yet. There are only a handful of companies, I believe, that claim to even be selling cars under those auspices. How come you haven't been able to take that step yet? Because I know at one point that was the intention.
Yeah. Well, it is a good question. There is one company that is doing it. That's the Morgan Motor Company. So they sell a version now of their Morgan. I forget which model it is, the Plus 4 or the Plus 6 or whatever. It has a BMW four-cylinder turbo engine that has gone through that Fast Act or low volume vehicle certification process. They're the only one currently. So we have been working with Ford on a Fast Act program proposal. We've also had discussions with other OEMs. I think really what's kind of kept this program from really getting traction is it's a pretty big investment on the part of the manufacturer. And I don't know that anyone really thought that it would be. And honestly, I don't know that anyone really thinks that this is a tough business, but I can tell you it is. In spite of the price point, there's an awful lot of engineering, there's a lot of content, there's a lot of cost that goes into the vehicle. And then you add to that, the cost of complying with the regulations of the FAST Act and in the engineering work that has to be done, the testing, the validation, and all the work that has to be done. It really makes a difficult business equation.
And that main hitch now is the motor at this point, or is it the body as well?
Yeah, most of the issue is around meeting the emissions requirement because you have to deliver a current model year emissions certified vehicle. And that's the trick because there are so many elements to an emissions system. And if you don't change any, you can basically use the original equipment manufacturer's certification process, but that's not feasible when you're transplanting that powertrain into vintage vehicle architecture. Everything doesn't transfer over. I mean, and I'm talking about things like the fuel cap and the fuel tank and the exhaust, routing, the manifolds and where exactly the O2 sensor is and all that stuff. If you change anything, now you're opening up yourselves to having to retest and recertify. And then when you get into that, then the dollars start to get really big. And when your program volume is limited to 325 units annually, then it starts to really put pressure on the business equation. That's the biggest issue. And I think we're learning as we go. And I think there is a path. And I think honestly, Revology is a better position than any other company in the market to take, to be out there working with one of the major OEMs using one of their powertrains and having a Fast Act certified vehicle on the market. So we'll get there. Which one it'll be, it's hard to say. There's a few horses in the race right now.
Do you find the younger collectors or people that be interested in a vehicle like this following you? I mean, do you think 10 years from now, Revology will be doing a Mustang 2 or a Fox body reproduction?
Yeah, people. It's funny. Someone just came out with a Fox body, and I think this is why I feel old, because my first new car was a Fox body Mustang. That was 1988. So now people are bringing them back as reproductions. It's like, okay. The limiting factor to people purchasing one of our cars, obviously, is the price point. I mean, it's, I wish we could build these cars less expensively and offer them at a more attractive, more accessible price point, but just the economics don't allow it. But there are a few young people that, for whatever reason, have the means, and so we do have a few buyers that are young. I think our youngest buyer is 25 years old. So, for someone that in that age bracket to be attracted to a 60s automobile, it shows that this era of automobiles, the attraction, it spans generations. It's not necessarily age specific. So yeah, I think there could be pretty long legs to this. Hard to say when people will stop being interested.
Alex, you have a 2006 Mustang. In 10 or 20 years, would you like to buy a totally recreated version of that?
I'd love to have a recreated version of my car right now. I love my car, but that's not exactly the greatest Mustang generation ever built. I think that the whole concept is so interesting because as time goes on and the company grows and you have different generations cycle into this sort of level of wealth. I mean, Tom's there living it, so he knows he's seen it, with this initial generation of Mustang. I mean, there's always going to be tastes that sort of shift, but I feel like what you've got going on there is you have processes basically in place that give you the flexibility to adapt to a different body style or a different OEM or different genre vehicle, trucks and SUVs, might have more of a resonance down the road with a future, younger generation than today.
Well, that's definitely true. People always ask me, like, why Mustang? Well, are you like a Mustang guy? Well, I mean, my first car was a Mustang. My first new car was a Mustang. I worked for Ford for 17 years. So yes, I have an affinity for Mustang, but I'm not like just Mustang. And we as a company are not just Mustang. And in fact, the appeal of our car is, yeah, I mean, yeah, the Mustang is what kind of you connect with, but we sell our cars to a lot of people that have never owned a Ford. like really surprising number of people that tell us, gosh, I've always been a GM person, or I've always been this, or always been that, or I've never had a Ford. It's like never even crossed their mind to buy or own a Ford vehicle. And they buy our car. Now they kind of get connected to the Ford brand. It's not a key reason for purchase, the fact that it's a Mustang. It's more about what we do with it, I think, is what attracts people.
How much of it do you think is just these are great designs and that era of muscle slash performance vehicle is loaded with that kind of thing? Where is it one of these things where there is a certain timelessness that just speaks to people? I mean, there's a reason the
Yeah.
new Mustangs are still going back to 2005 of retro design, more or less.
Yeah, Alex, I think you're absolutely right with that one. You know, the late 60s, it was really the end of an era in terms of automotive design, because you had all the safety requirements that started to phase in around that time, and that constrained designers. And that's why all the cars that we have today all pretty much look the same, because they're all having to meet, all of these standards, which are good. I mean, it's a good thing that we have these standards in place, but it certainly has constrained the creativity of the designers. So that makes this era unique. And I think there is probably a pretty strong reason why it may always be relevant to people, regardless of their age group. And look at other iconic designs, from this period. Like think of the Stratocaster, the Fender Stratocaster guitar. I mean, an iconic design. It hasn't changed since the 50s. The Rolex Daytona watch. I mean, some of these classic designs. Now, those products don't have to meet crash standards or emission standards, so they can keep making them that way. But cars do, and that's why these designs aren't being made today. So, yeah, I think that's a big part of it. It's a really special era in automotive history, and probably why it may be relevant for quite some time to come.
Tom Scarpello, thanks so much for talking to us today. And folks, if you want to see what this car looks like, of course, AmericanCarsAndRacing.com has plenty of pictures and more information about the Boss 429. Tom, thanks again.
Thanks, guys. I enjoyed being with you.
Alex, before we go, this is an American Cars and Racing show, so we got to talk a little bit about racing. Cadillac announcing that it's going to be kicking off the Cadillac Formula One team with a Super Bowl ad next year, when it's going to reveal the final livery, the paint scheme of the cars. Super Bowl ads are not cheap. 125 million people going to be watching that game.
No brainer, in my opinion. The Super Bowl is the most watched thing, in the country, in the United States. If you want to make a big splash and make the, for lack of a better term, normies understand, and perhaps in some cases realize for the first time that you are going racing in Formula One, this is the best way to do it. So I think that is a smart Super Bowl spend. Formula One is just a hurricane of money flying in every direction as it is. So, you drop $6 million on a Super Bowl spot. I think the ROI on that probably has a pretty long tail. I hope that the ad is cool. I'm very interested to see what the, car is going to look like myself. I think that'll do a lot of heavy lifting for, Cadillac. And the other thing is that the other reason it's smart is, I mean, the ads in the Super Bowl get as much, if not more, attention than the Super Bowl itself. So if it's really good, it'll show up in the ad meter and it'll be talked about. So a lot of upside for Cadillac to do it this way.
Of course, Ford is going to be revealing its liveries with Red Bull and Racing Bulls on January 15th. We talked to Mark Rushbrook about that a couple of episodes ago. You go ahead and listen to that. Wonder if Ford will want to get in on this Super Bowl action now, just to not give Cadillac the big stage by itself.
Formula One is so much more mainstream now than it was even 5 years ago. If I'm an American automaker, I'm getting in on that action.
Folks, one tip though, even though the Cadillac livery reveal is going to be on February 8th during the Super Bowl, the car itself is going to be revealed on January 26th at the first preseason test in Barcelona, where all the Formula One teams are. I'm guessing I'll have a cool camouflage wrap when it's there, but that's the first time we get a look at the actual car. Alex and I will definitely be watching that when it happens. And we'll be back next week with another show. Thanks for joining me again, Alex.
Thanks, man.
The Gas is a production of A Car Media and American Cars and Racing.com.